Welcome to this Cycling Live. Today I'm joined by Dione Wang from Singapore. Dione is an up-and-coming talent in the world of women's virtual cycling. She's racing certainly at the national level in the real world of cycling in Singapore. She's competing in elite level women's events across Asia, and she's got a lot of experience racing in the virtual world. So what Dione and I are going to be talking about today are race tactics. How do you not just train for a virtual event, but how do you win, not just with your legs, but with your head in a virtual race? So Dione Wang, welcome to you and thanks for joining us today. Maybe you can just say a few words about how you got into cycling and why virtual cycling is such a passion for you.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie. That's a very kind introduction. I don't deserve any of it, but thank you. Well, I first started cycling from triathlon. I really enjoyed the endurance aspect of the sport. And the cycling was just, the most social aspect, and also the sport that you could do for the longest. You can't swim for 5 hours, and neither could you run necessarily for 5 hours. With Zwift racing, I first started getting serious into cycling by doing lots of trainer workouts. And I did trainer road for maybe 2, even 3 years. And when I found Zwift, the competitive aspect was really, really attractive. But the best thing about it really was finding this international community of cyclists, especially women. Singapore is a very tiny place. We don't have too many girls here. But when I get on Zwift, the competition for women is just amazing. It just, democratizes participation. People from all over the world can jump in. And it's a concentration of talent. So it's super enjoyable and really good for my training. The only problem is overdoing it.
I mean, Dione, you're being a little bit humble, I think, because you have been actually shortlisted to go through to the finals of the Zwift Academy. So it is impressive, actually, that although living in Singapore, as you said, not a huge women's cycling community, but actually you've been able to really make it to a very good level internationally, competing against people from the Americas, from Australia, from Europe. So I think we should recognize that there's obviously some talent behind what you do. But look, today what we're here to talk about is not so much, how to get on Zwift or set up on Zwift. We really want to talk about the tips and tricks for race tactics. So one of the things that we talked about actually, before this call, Dione, is you talked to me about how you learned early on about the importance of really warming up and getting ready physically and mentally for the start of the race. Why is that so important compared to, say, a physical event?
Yeah, because in a physical event, you've got like 150K, the first 20K, they might even be neutral. It's an easy start. But on Zwift, because you can start as hard as you like, everyone starts as hard as they can. So typically the men will be producing 600, 700, 800 watts. For the women, I'm typically over 300 watts for 30 seconds, a minute, even 2 minutes. It's basically a sprint from the start. So you want to warm up for at least 15, 20 minutes.
And I think it's interesting what you told me, Dione, because you were like coaching me for my first virtual race just a couple of weeks ago, which for me was on the Rouvy platform. And one of the other tips that you gave me is that, Jamie, you start winding up that gear at least 15 or 20 seconds before the gun goes off for the start. Can you tell me or share with the people watching why that is so important? Because when I did it, I saw that actually some other guys, they just started, winding it up after the gun went, and they were soon left.
Yeah.
So why this early wind up?
Well, it's a competition. If other people are starting 10 seconds ahead, then you better make sure that you are also 10 seconds ahead. Otherwise, you're about 20 meters back. So I'm not sure how it is on Rouvy, but on Zwift, you are placed in start pens. And if you have a massive field and you even join the start pen, 10 minutes later than others, you are suddenly 20 meters behind. Is that the same case for Rouvy? When you have a big
field? No, with Rouvy, you're all on the line together. You're not sort of
okay.
Back. However, certainly what I saw was that, I wound up my gear with that sort of 15 seconds to go. And for the numbers you mentioned, you mentioned a certain wattage number. Well, for me, I was on around 1.4, my FTP. So my current FTP is around 305 watts. So for the first minute or so, I was on around 400, 420 watts.
Yeah, that's really typical.
So
And with spikes, it's not just 400 steady.
No, it took off, but suddenly what I saw in the Rouvy platform is suddenly you're just passing everybody. There's literally like hundreds of avatars flashing.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can go through people just like on the Zwift platform, unlike in a real race, obviously.
So I guess that's also important to explain, Dione, because what you said to me is that that's super important because actually, very similarly, I guess, I'm living here in Belgium and we have kermesse racing, right? And also always very explosive stuff. I'm competing in cyclocross this year, very similar as well. You go from the gun. And of course, what can happen in a kermesse, what can happen in a cyclocross race as well, is a small group gets away very quickly and the gaps open up. And you explained to me that that's also very important. Can you talk to our viewers about why those gaps opening up early on can be so critical?
Yeah, because in Zwift, it's really, really difficult to close down a gap once it's been opened on you. So it's critical in the first 5, even 10, 15 minutes to get into the first group. Because if you haven't made that break, you're never going to be able to catch it.
And that's because, as I understand, I mean, there is this drafting effect, right? Can you
yes, exactly.
about how the drafting effect works and how it impacts, either whether you're in the front group, are you the first person, the third person, or are you in a chase group? Can you explain a little bit? Because that for me was a revelation when you told me about it.
Yeah, well, just like in real life, Zwift and I suppose Rouvy tries to make the draft as realistic and as intuitive as possible. So when you're behind another rider, you save quite a bit of watts. And of course, cycling, especially on Zwift and Rouvy, where it's an hour of intense stuff, you want to be saving as many watts and as many joules as you can. You want to titrate your energy for where it really matters. So on a flat, on above a certain speed, about 25k an hour, you make sure that you're behind another rider. You never ever sit in the wind. Now, one thing some people might think about is, when they see a climb like 5-6%, they think they should go to the front. No, that is not true. Even at 5-6%, the speeds on Zwift are a little bit exaggerated. So you might be at 6%, but you're still going at 30k an hour, and therefore you still need to be in the draft.
Yeah, very, very important. And that was great advice from me, Dione, because I remember my first Rouvy race, you kind of coached me beforehand, and I like blasted out at the start like a greyhound out. But very quickly what I saw was that I was with suddenly this front group of about 10 riders. And I looked on Rouvy, you can see how many meters behind, and suddenly we had a gap of 50 meters. And as you described, that gap stayed, and then I was with that lead group. So if I hadn't have followed your advice, if I hadn't been in that lead group, of course, what's the alternative is a massive effort. And again, if I look at the similarity with kermesse racing, right? If you've got 2 guys up the road, okay, to bridge when you're with a huge peloton, not maybe that's well within reason. But when you've got 10 strong riders up the road, even with kermesse,
they're not going to be brought back.
Even if you've got a peloton of 50 guys, very difficult. So I think that parallel is there. So that was great advice. The only problem, of course, Dione, is that in my case, I followed your advice, I'm in the front group, and suddenly I look down and my normalized power for the first 10 minutes is like 350 watts. It's like one over my, threshold. So I was just then having my fingers crossed that it's gonna back up a little bit. But very important to get in there. Sorry, go ahead, Dione.
Oh, indeed, you spend a lot of time in e-racing at sort of heart rate at Vo2 Max levels. So your recoveries are maybe tempo and all the other time you're way above threshold.
Yeah, I think that definitely will come back to that because that's also relevant for training. Let's talk to our viewers about studying the course, because I really underestimated how important that would be. I actually, in October, I raced the Giro Sardinia, and there, on the first stage, it was a real tough one, and we had a really steep and technical climb. So I went to the climb with my brother-in-law, Dirk Walters, on the motorbike, and we did a recce on the climb. So I saw in the race book that this is a 5 kilometer climb, but actually, when we went there physically on the motorbike, we discovered it was 4.6 kilometers.
And that makes all the difference.
That was a game changer for me in the race.
Yeah.
Psychologically, I had an edge knowing where the top of the climb was coming.
Yes.
Whereas I could see some other guys who were really blowing in that last half K before the top.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess I underestimated how important course analysis is. So can you talk to us about that? I mean, how do you analyze a course? What is it you should be looking for?
Well, just like in a real life race, you definitely want to know where the climbs are coming. In Zwift, as you approach a climb, unlike in real life, though, you do not really want to be in the front because you want to use this special draft effect of Zwift, which is more exaggerated than in real life. So the advice I would give people is actually to hang near the back-ish of a group that's heading into a climb, and you accelerate when the group is accelerating, so that all your effort that you are putting into your acceleration helps you move up through the group as you ascend. It's like getting a free lift up for a little bit. It's maybe about 10-15 seconds, but it really makes the difference. So knowing when the climb starts.
Yeah. But that is really important because, again, if I go to my Giro Stardino story, I can climb, but I'm not the best climber. But so I'm always making sure that I'm right at the front on the climb, and then I use drift. Whereas what you're saying is that in Zwift, and I think also on
just the opposite.
Opposite, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, go ahead, Dione.
Oh, please go ahead.
No, I mean, the other thing that I did with your advice was I printed out because, on Rouvy, sponsored by Pedal Italy, and there was the course profile. Now, normally in a race, I would have the kilometers or the race profile stuck to my top tube or on my handlebar. The luxury in the world of virtual cycling is I had a very big printout of the course attached to the bottom of my TV. And I here's the first climb at 5 kilometers. The really tough one starts at the 15 kilometer point. And I really annotated on that piece of paper, very large and visual, so that I had my strategy in mind. Do you do something similar? You're an expert now. Maybe you just look at the screen as you go.
That's really, really good what you did. Well, I'm a little bit more casual, and also I know the Zwift courses a little bit better now, as having raced so many times. And also on Zwift, there's a little map on your top right hand corner of the screen, so you can see where the corners are and when the road is pitching up and down. It's not perfect, but it does the job. And also with Zwift, unlike in real life, you have to accelerate into the corners. You do not back off. That's because your avatar is going to take a super wide arc if you don't accelerate. And then that means you just travel more distance than everyone else.
Well, this comes to the other point that you really told me and really emphasized with me with the coaching you did for me, was around really minding the gap. Okay, I mean, we've talked about drafting. But also, I had a bit of a shock on when I had a Rouvy race on Friday night, just a few days ago. And I was also really shocked by how, just by losing a few moments of concentration, suddenly the gap opens up. Now, on Rouvy, you actually have a little bar which indicates how many meters you are from the person in front. But
same on Zwift.
Yeah, so what struck me was really how alert you have to remain, because when you're in a real race, of course you have visual of the person in front of you. You see them jump out of the seat and accelerate, attack. You're right onto it. So I'm kind of looking at the avatar.
See him changing his gears.
Exactly. So I'm looking at the avatar, but actually what I should be looking at is not so much the avatar. I should be looking at the what's the kilo that this person is putting out right
now. It's actually quite...
What's your advice on that?
Well, I would totally agree with looking at the watt per kilo on this little sidebar. How is it on Rouvy? You have that as well.
It's the same. Yeah. So you have the ride,
so you have
the gap, and then you have the you see the watts per kilo they're putting out at that moment.
So you have all this information ahead in front of you, and sometimes it's information overload really, because you want to be looking at the avatar, you want to be looking at the course, you want to be looking at a watt per kilo. With Zwift, I'm not sure if it's the same on Rouvy. You pay attention to the watt per kilo, both to see when somebody is trying to get a jump on you, and also when you're just sitting in a bunch, to make sure that you do just a little bit less than what everyone else is doing around you, just to make sure that you save that little bit more. So yes, watching the watt per kilo is super important. And if you want to take this to the next level, you can get a friend to DS for you to add as a director sportive, and then he'll be looking at the watt per kilo of everyone around you and then talking in your ear. So that's what
I think I'm going to be talking to my coach Alan Davis about this, because honestly, like it's like it's almost like having a heads-up display in a jet fighter for me.
Oh yes,
you've got on Rouvy, you've got the little bar saying how far you are behind the person in front. Then you've got all the riders and the watts per kilos that they're producing. Then you've got the meters between the riders. Then you've got the profile on the screen saying how far you are from the climb. For me, my head was almost ready.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to keep your legs going and thinking about what you should be doing, and drinking and toweling off and having the fan on. Yeah, it's a lot of things going on.
You know, that thing that you said about, being really alert of being in the group, because one of the pieces of advice that I got from Alan Davis, the coach very early on, is Alan says to me, he reminds me of this, that whenever you're in a breakaway, whenever you're up the road with a group, only ever work as hard as the least hardest working person, because your objective, if you're in a big breakaway, it's a gamble. You're hoping that you're going to stay away from the time, but your objective at the end of the day is to have more energy end of the race than the other people in that breakaway. And by being at the front and driving it, you're giving people a free ride.
That's not smart.
It's very true on Rouvy as it would be in the real world. Only ever work as hard as the least hardest working rider when you're in a sizable breakaway. Very important. Thanks, Dione. Hey, so the other thing that gave me a big shock, Dione, and you didn't tell me about this, so I wasn't prepared for it. Maybe you just forgot, was the downhill. Because in Rouvy, I'm thinking, here comes the downhill, and like now I can relax. It didn't happen. When we went onto the downhill, I saw the watts per kilo numbers of some of the guys going up. What's going on there?
Oh, did it really go up? Because in Zwift they typically go down a little bit. So what's the situation?
I don't know. Maybe that's something unique to Rouvy. But what I saw was, but also I was racing against Italians, because it was organised by Pedal Italy. It was on the Mortirolo.
They have to win.
The Italians, they just like to go fast downhill. All right, think of.
Yes, that's true.
They love, and for me, living in Belgium, we don't have a lot of mountains. They're similar to you in Singapore, so I'm not the best descender. So I was hoping that would be an advantage. But in Rouvy, on Rouvy, what I saw certainly was, there is the way the algorithm or the software works. There's not as much of an advantage going downhill. The thing, however, that I noticed was that you can definitely attack on the downhill. And that if you do what I did, which was lose concentration or sleep a little bit, gaps can open up on the descent, just as they would on the downhill.
Yeah, it's even quicker for gaps to open up on the descent. It's a lot more dangerous to lose concentration, because the minute somebody puts in like a dig of 8 watts a kilo for even just 2 seconds, and you are coasting at 2 watts a kilo, a gap opens up and you'll never be able to close it. So generally speaking, on descents, you definitely need to put the power, stay on the pedals, maybe not go super hard. Being tempo should be about enough, but really watch when somebody is putting an attack in. Again, this is where you have to watch the watt per kilo side by the side rather than just looking at the avatar. So you got to be really, really concentrated on that.
You see, you didn't tell me that. Like I was thinking, here we go downhill. So I'm like sitting up, I'm having a drink and having.
You got.
Look at the screen and.
You got to keep the power on and keep the concentration on most of all. You should take the opportunity to have a drink for sure, because it's easier to do that than when you're climbing.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. But we maybe talk about some of the little tricks on hydration and stuff a little bit later. So tell me about the finale, because again, I really blew it. On Friday night, I was like, there was 3 guys up the road, and I was with a group of 2 others. So I'm like hoping I'm going to be 4th here, not on the podium, but getting close. And I was doing everything right. I'm sitting on the back of these 3 guys and these 2 guys, and I'm watching watching their avatars. And then suddenly, I don't know, maybe 1.2 kilometers to go, I look at the screen and suddenly the guys are gone. They've got like a 20-meter.
Oh, wow, that's a very long-range attack.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's what they did, and I wasn't ready for that. I just wasn't ready, because I'm thinking, it's going to be like 300 meters out, 400 meters,
Mm-hmm.
ready. What's your advice, going into that last, say, 2 kilometers of the race, if you are in a smaller or even bigger group?
Well, if you're in a bigger group, you should definitely expect people to be attacking off the front. These guys might not be in there for the win. They might be working for a teammate. So their job is to tire everyone else out.
I've got to get myself a lead out woman. I don't know what are you doing? What are you doing on Saturday? I've got another one.
I could be a lead out. I could be for sure a lead out woman. I just can't be the final sprinter. But yeah, so well, if you're alone, I would suggest to just try to cover every break as much as you can, because while you're spending energy trying to close those little gaps, you're also moving up, and that helps because the finish line is not too far away.
Oh, okay. And so, is there any such thing because I know that like Zwift specifically has some gaming elements and stuff. So in the sprint, can you like headbutt people and lean on them? And
No, for sure. You don't have the opportunity to do that. I'm glad because UCI has its own rules, but they're not really enforced. In Zwift, it's just not possible to do anything dangerous.
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed with that on Rouvy as well because I like a little bit of argy bargy in the sprint. That's fun, and then so maybe that's something they should think about. Like throwing in the virtual headbutt or the lead.
Well, the only thing you're doing violence to is your bike on the trainer. You just got to be careful not to pull on the handlebars too much and sort of like rip the quick release out of the.
Hey, but Dione, you see that little sign behind me? That Reynolds?
Yeah.
That's exactly why. Actually, for me, I've been lucky enough to be supported by Reynolds, but I use a Reynolds 953 stainless steel frame because I had some problems with carbon frames. I actually cracked some
carbon frames. Oh my god!
Some very thin rear stays on a couple of my bikes from just the
too strong for your own good.
I don't know about that. I think it's bad technique more than strength, but I don't have that problem anymore. But bike setup very important. I mean, the other thing I guess that I underestimated was the importance of gearing. I'm thinking. But actually, no, when I looked at the profile, for example, the Rouvy race I had last week, it was on the Mortadolo. Some brutal gradients there, 16, 18%. And with the smart trainer, I absolutely was using my 34, 32, keeping my cadence up.
Okay, yeah.
Any other specific tips or tricks on your bike setup, gearing?
On the gearing, I've got a question for you. So on Zwift, you are able to sort of scale down the gradient feel of these really steep walls. So a 14% might not feel 14%. You can scale it down so that it just feels like 7%. Is that the same on Rouvy? You still have to produce the same number of watts to go at a certain amount of speed, if you get what I mean. But you just don't feel the kick of that gradient. You don't. Yeah.
I mean, I was using of course I got a smart trainer. All I know, Dione, I mean, I don't know if it was, like really adjusting I just know that it hurt because the was, that's incredible. I mean, literally, I was 1 hour on threshold. It was just a there was no up and down on that one. It was just a clutch. But let's talk a little bit more about the gaming aspects because again, I mean, I'm quite new to Rouvy, so I'm still working out quite a few aspects of it. But on Zwift, the gaming aspects are pretty well understood. You can get these fancy, what do you call it, like Tron bikes and stuff like that. So can you talk maybe about the 3 or 4 most important aspects of the gaming elements, the power-ups?
So on Zwift, your equipment does matter a little bit. If you want to get really nerdy, there are, Excel tables out there comparing the CDA of different bike frames and different wheels together with the weight, how they perform on different courses. Now, you earn this equipment not by paying money as you do in real life, but by collecting so-called sweat points on Zwift, which is just, the number of kilometers or the number of hours you've been riding. So for any given course, you want to make sure you have the most suitable equipment. And on top of equipment, during a race, you are assigned random so-called power-ups. These are little widgets that you can click One of them, for example, makes you lighter by 15 kilos for 15 seconds. Another one makes you more aerodynamic. So that's really useful when you are at already very high speeds and when you want to sprint. There are other power-ups that make your avatar impossible to be drafted by others. So at the higher levels of Zwift racing, how you deploy these avatars and the timing at which you do so is really, really important.
Wow.
So this aspect has nothing to do with how strong you are, but how well you are at clicking that button at the correct time.
Which is fun. I mean, I think that's, when you and I remember we had our first conversations about virtual racing. I was a little bit of a cynic because I'm thinking, it's going to be a watts per kilo competition, and to be honest, okay, I'm not the most powerful, strongest guy out there. I think you would agree. You're similar, but what I started to understand from you, and then in my experience with Rouvy, is that you're not just racing with your legs; you really are racing with your head. Whether that's getting in the early breakaway, whether it's really watching the gaps, making sure that you're saving energy except for the most vital moments. I found it really a very cognitive experience, not just a physical one. Those aspects, I think, only going to get more and more exciting. Maybe we can talk just for a few minutes because we don't have so much more time. Maybe we just talk about some of the training aspects. So now for me, as you and I spoke about when we first connected, I've been preparing for the cyclocross season here in Belgium this year. Because of COVID, the racing will probably not start now until mid-January. But in a way, what I've realized is that cyclocross training, because in cyclocross races are typically 30, 40 minutes long, extremely explosive, and you're essentially either on threshold, over threshold the whole way. So for me, actually, my experience on Rouvy over the last couple of weeks has been that the races are actually very similar to what I would do in a cyclocross, and therefore the training also overlaps with that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how your experience of virtual racing has been different to real world racing, and then what that requires in terms of adaptation of training?
Well, in real road racing, you're typically going for 3, 4, 5 hours. On Zwift, it's more like 40 to 60 minutes. So it's a lot more intense in a shorter time frame, and you're spending a lot more of that percentage of time in extremely high heart rates. So, your typical heart rate will be zone 4, zone 5 average for the whole race. You want to make sure that you are able to process lactate very efficiently, because a lot of the time you're going to be in the red, and the time that you have to recover from that is extremely short. So what I find to be quite important and useful is sort of like 30, 15, 40, 20 style Vo2 Max workouts, where you work for 40 seconds, you rest for 20, and you do repetitions of this for blocks of 10 minutes, and you do maybe 3 reps in a day.
And I think I'm using exactly the same protocols, Dione, for cyclocross. So that's true. And again, for those of you who are new to the concept, what we will do actually is below this video, we'll provide some links, for example, to some of the studies. Dione and I are both on Strava. I upload all of my training, all of my protocols on Strava, so you can go and look at them there. The other term for what Dione is describing is a micro interval. So it's essentially, like she said, it's 20 to 40 seconds on, and when we say on, it's an effort typically for me of around 1.4 times your FTP.
Yep.
That's heavy, okay? It's not your normal. It's not your normal traditional 5-minute interval at 1.1 FTP or something like that. It's heavy. So again, for me, that would be a 30-second on of about 420 to 450 watts, and then 15 seconds, nothing, really, really easy. And then back up again to that 1.4 times FTP. And what this is actually doing for your body, it's training your body to process lactate, okay? And what you'll also see, very interestingly, in this kind of training is that during the 30-second effort, your heart rate will, of course, increase, often up to close to threshold, but then it goes down again. And now the advantage with this also is that in terms of the lactate that your body is producing, that lactate's being cleared much more efficiently. And the research on this shows that that's actually much, much better for the development of muscular power. Now, the reason for that is if when you do those longer intervals, like 5 minutes, the lactate is pooled. the lactate builds up and builds up. And the latest science on this actually shows that too much lactate in your system can actually destroy or adversely affect the mitochondria in your muscles. So longer intervals not so good. But Dione, can you tell people how you feel after one of these 3 by 10 minute micro interval training sessions?
Well, I started by really sucking at them because I'm not good at high-powered efforts. But then, just with everything else, you get used to it. And they're also very, very fun to do because they require so much concentration for the 10 minutes. You just want to get to the end of the 10 minutes. That it's very engaging. Yeah. So
I think so
these days, it's actually my favorite workout.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, because physically you feel smashed at the end of the workout. However, because of the on-off nature of the interval, it's less mentally taxing, I find.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
No, go ahead. They're less mentally taxing than maximal aerobic work, which targets the same physiological system, but as you said, causes lactate to pool in your legs for 4 or 5 minutes. And yes, those hydrogen ions are not good for mitochondrial development.
So this is very important for us, and actually, the amazing thing is, we think about all of these superstars at the moment. Think about people like Wout van Aert, Mathieu van der Poel. Where have they come from? They've come from cyclocross. And this kind of training has been, the bread and butter of cyclocross, competition for probably half a decade, 5 or 6 years, where it's really come into its fore. And that many people believe is part of the reason we see the success. The other aspect of this, of course, which is extremely important, particularly for me, Dione, because I'm like almost 50, is that virtual racing, what I've discovered, of course, incredibly intense. Training for virtual racing, these kind of micro interval efforts, very intense. So it's very easy to overdo it, and you really have to take care of recovery. Can you talk to us a little bit about recovery, Dione? Because we will share with everybody some of these protocols about the micro interval efforts, how you structure those. Yeah. How about recovery? What any tips or tricks there?
Well, yeah, there are so many tips and tricks out there. So many diets and different supplements and different recovery systems, ice baths, massage that you can use. But the most important thing for me, and I think for most of us, is sleep. It's critical to get whatever amount of sleep you need, whether that's 7, 8, it could even be 9 or 10 hours. And the more you train, the more you need to sleep. So that's it's not very sexy. It's the simplest thing, but that's really, really important.
I love my pillow, Dione. Don't worry.
I love my sleep. Yeah. But people think.
The other thing which is very, very important is this, right? And again, we talk about the style of racing we have here. Mm-hmm. You cannot be training 6 days a week, going out doing 3 hours at heart rate zone 3. So what I'm saying here is you can't be going out doing these sort of tempo endurance kind of rides and at the same time doing this really high-end micro interval kind of stuff.
Exactly. I was about to say that I like to look at my weekly intensity factor. And if it's too much above like 0.75, I tend to scale it back a little bit. Because if you spend a lot of time above 0.9 IF, you want to spend the rest of the time at closer to 0.5 or 0.6. Therefore, if you keep an eye on your weekly average, then that should give you a sense of whether you're recovering enough.
Yeah, so it's super important. And again, I go back to my coach, Alan Davis. And what Alan says to me always is, Jamie, your hard days are only as good as your easy days. So what Alan and I are constantly monitoring, we use Training Peaks, is my fatigue levels. And for example, so I had a race last week on Wednesday evening, and then I had another race on Friday, I think, so just a couple of days later. So, it was earlier than that. I think there was like 4 days gap in between anyway. But the important thing is that when I look at my week, for example, if I've done a really hard race like I did on Rouvy, or I've been in a kermesse really in the break, and then let's just say even 2 days, sometimes even 3 days later, I go into one of these micro interval sessions. And what I will often find, and again, remember, I'm turning 50 pretty soon. What I often find is, I go into that first 10-minute micro interval block, and my normalized power at the end of that block, which should be for me somewhere over my FTP for that 20-minute. I was doing a full 10-minute block. So for me, I'm looking at somewhere around 330 watts for 10 minutes, even with the micro interval up and down. If I do, if I do that 10 minutes and then I see that it's 300 watts and I see that my heart rate will not go over 150, 160 beats a minute, I know that my body is still fatigued. So I just stop the training right there. I just get off my and say, you know what, my body's not ready for it. So, so I think, you know, when you are virtual racing, I guess the tips we would have for people doing is, number one, you know, don't overdo it because the intensity is really high. Don't try to, you know, be virtual racing intensity while at the same time doing big blocks of endurance.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very easy to fall into that. And I did that
very time. And thirdly, you really monitor your fatigue levels, either by listening to your body, how you feel, or really analyzing the numbers. They're there for you to look at. Anything you'd add from your experience? Because you said you overdid a little bit. Can you talk about how that happened? I mean, you got into overtraining.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, we went into lockdown in Singapore. All my races in Europe got cancelled, and I thought I'm going to double down. I'm going to use this time to just really train. And I did, for example, a 6-week block of 30 hours average a week at an average of like 0.8 intensity factor. And that just, you know, completely shattered me. I don't think I ever recovered from it. Of course, I didn't take a proper recovery. I just continued doing 20 over hours every week. So yeah, no, that sort of thing is not great for you. It's good to sort of go a little bit deeper and try to get overcompensation. But like you said, the overcompensation comes when you rest.
Yeah. So last thing we'll do, last thing I'd like to touch on is actually nutrition and actually preparing your body for the race. Now, for me, again, I've raced at the world level on the track. Now, of course, you know, if you're doing a 10K scratch race, or for me, my specialization is 20K points race. I do not want to get into that event feeling bloated, you know, and it's not so much like, you know, on the road, you know, when you're on the road, like Giro Sardinia this year, I really want to get my body weight down. Okay, because we are really fighting gravity on the ascents. Now, of course, on Rouvy, you have to put your body weight in. It's there. It's important. Okay. We might not go there in terms of how people can hack that. I don't want to talk about the cheaters, but the piece of advice I would give to people is this. I read an amazing book this year, a book called Fueling the Cycling Revolution by Nigel Mitchell, who is the Sky now, Ineos, and he talks about the importance of low residue. Now, what does that mean? Inside our bodies, we've got lots and lots of food digesting at any given time. So what Nigel recommends for road riders, but especially for track riders, he had a lot of success with the British track team, is that you want to get rid of as much of that sort of residue inside your body as possible so you're not bloated.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So again, we'll put a link below this video to Nigel's book. And that's one of the things that I always do. About 48 hours before my virtual race, I'm actually switching to this low residue diet so that when I get on the bike and when I'm having to do these really I'm feeling light. And the other thing, of course, I don't eat for at least 3.5 to 4 hours before the event itself because of the explosive nature of it.
Yes.
Do you follow any protocols there when it comes to food?
Oh, well, no, because I ride Zwift races typically in the morning before work. Sometimes they can start at 6 a.m. and I don't like waking up too early. So I do have solid food like an hour and a half before. I like to have, it doesn't sound very tasty, but it actually is delicious. White rice with peanut butter and honey. It's super easy to digest. It doesn't have any gluten. Nobody's going to have any problems with it. You just got to make sure don't overdo it with the peanut butter because that has a bit of protein and fat. But that's delicious. And then during the race, I might have like a drink with isotonic and a bit of carbs in it and caffeine.
Actually, it's interesting you say that. I mean, because Nigel Mitchell, you know, he recommends something, but essentially exactly what you said. Okay, so for me also, So for me, also my meal, typically 4 hours before, is I prefer basmati rice because it's got a higher glycemic index than jasmine rice or other rice. And then I just have that, as you said, with a little bit of garnish, sometimes an egg, something like that, a little bit of fish, but certainly nothing too heavy. So good advice. Hey, the other thing we should have mentioned when we talked about training, right? And a very important point was that we talked about, for example, the micro intervals. When I was talking with Michael Rogers, now Michael's an amazing guy. He's 3-time world time trial champion. He raced with Sky, He said that when he was working with Tim Kerrison, who's the legendary
yes,
guy, the Aussie guy.
He's got a workout in Trainer Road.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I have to look at that. So remember what we said about the start of a virtual race? For the first minute, it is absolutely full blast, right? So one of the things that Mick, always says to me is, Jamie, if it doesn't happen in training, it doesn't happen in the race. So what I always do, Dione, is, when I'm going into those say 3 by 10 minute micro interval blocks.
Yeah.
What I do actually is before I start the 3 by 10 minutes, I do my 20 minutes warm up, and then I do 1 minute absolutely full gas. Then I have a few minutes rest, and then I go into my 10-minute block. Because again, what you're doing is you're preparing your body to replicate the experience of the race. Now, for me, I was doing that already for cyclocross, because that's exactly how a cyclocross race starts.
Yeah.
Anything else we've forgotten, Dione, that we should share with people?
Well, no, I think we've covered quite a lot. Yeah, and I think a repeated theme of this is, in Zwift races, because and Rouvy as well, because everything is so intense, you want to be saving energy as much as you can. It's all about titrating your energy. Everyone has a point where it's their limit, and you just want to make sure that yours is a little bit further down the line than your competitor.
Absolutely. So again, I think what we've been talking about throughout this is, if I was to summarize it, number one is train for the race. Okay. If you want to be successful at virtual racing, it's not winning a Grand Fondo World Series, 160 kilometer race. It's a very specific kind of event, and therefore
it's a totally new discipline, and now the UCI has an esports world championship, which is on December 9th. It's really coming up.
Well, we expect to see you there, Dione.
No, not quite, mate.
Eventually.
Australia is well represented.
I'm sure we'll see you eventually. I mean, the second thing I guess is very important that we've talked about is, do your homework, right? And just as you would, if you were training and you were going off to some Grand Fondo World Series event, you'd study the course. You'd analyze your competition. You'd look at the kind of watts per kilos you need to do for different periods of time based on the data that's out there, right?
Yeah.
That's important. Do your homework, And the third
there's so much data out there.
Look, Dione, you know what I do? Even especially when I'm preparing for the big world level events, is I stalk my competitors on Strava, right?
Oh yes,
so I can find them on Strava. I can see the training they're using. I can see their watts per kilogram numbers. So you can know a lot actually using it. And then the third thing, which I guess it ties all this together, is that we've said continuously throughout this discussion that you don't just race with your legs. Even in this virtual world, it's not purely about the watts per kilogram that you can produce.
Yeah.
It's also about how you use your head, tactical mass.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. So, Dione Wang, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How did you find this chat, Dione? Would you be willing to come back again sometime in the future?
Yeah, for sure. It's super fun. I learned quite a lot from you. For example, this nutrition book. Cycling Revolution. Yeah, so thank you. It's a great experience talking to you. Always good talking to you.
And I hope, Dione, you'll be willing to coach me again, because really it was amazing getting that advice from you.
I'll try to do a better job this time.
That's okay. Now I know the questions to ask, so it was also my fault being such a rookie. But no, really, honestly, I have to say that the advice you gave me and the amount of experience and knowledge that you've built up, I was really impressed. And that's exactly why I reached out to you to come on to TCL. So we'd be delighted to have you back again. So for those of you watching, if you have enjoyed this video, of course, please do give us the thumbs up, subscribe to the This Cycling Life YouTube channel. don't hesitate. If you've got questions, if you've got topics that you would like for us to address, maybe you have specific questions for Dione, don't hesitate to drop us a line and we'll try to produce something just for you. Dione Wang, thanks again for joining us and good luck.
Thank you. Same to you.